and welcome to Untold Stories. My name is Henrie and today's episode is about football. I must give a trigger warning because it is a really sad story, but here is Dan talking about his dad.
Does this sound crazy to you, what I'm about to do? Like, I'm gonna go to Moscow. She goes, for what? I was like, for the World Cup. She goes, okay. She goes, have you got a ticket? How's it going? My name's Daniyal. I'm 27 years old and I'm a presenter. And this is my story about football and my dad's battle with cancer. So October 2017, my dad was diagnosed with a pretty aggressive form of cancer. And going into the new year, that period was a very tough part of life. As he progressively got worse, obviously, a lot of my time was taken up, being with him or taking him to appointments or just generally dealing with making him trying to feel good about himself, and just everything was centered around how he was feeling. As we approached 2018, the FIFA World Cup was on the horizon, and I'd always been excited for World Cups, and going to a World Cup was always part of like one of my wildest dreams. I would have loved to have been there. But I just didn't think it was going to be a possible thing. First of all, I didn't really know how to do that. But second of all, my dad was my main priority. When the World Cup started, it was really strange. When the game started, I actually realized that the World Cup, or England's journey in the World Cup, or just all these countries playing together, was a very good distraction for me. I kind of forgot. It was almost as if my dad didn't have cancer. And when the matches would end, then I would go back to reality and make sure I did what I had to do, essentially. Every time I followed England, I was thinking, oh my God, like England for once are actually doing well and they're actually progressing in the tournament. It's not like just turning out to be England hyping it up and then absolutely getting battered. I was at a little convention, and on the game they were showing the England versus Sweden game, and I said to myself, now, do you know what? If they beat Sweden, which I think they will, I'm gonna go. And if they don't, then it's not meant to happen. So they beat Sweden and they're about to progress to the semi-finals. And as I was sitting at home one day, literally it was, I wanna say it was 4 p.m. And I was like, do you know what? I'm gonna do this. So I called my missus. She goes, are you going with anyone? I was like, no, I just feel like I wanna go. And she was like, what about your dad? And I knew my dad was never ever gonna stop me. Like, that's the thing about my dad, that even when he was in his worst period, I might get emotional. When my dad was in his worst period, I always knew he would just be focusing on, oh, what does Dan want to do? And let's let Dan do what he wants to do. I knew I was only going to be gone for a couple of days. So I was like, let's just do this. And luckily, you actually needed a visa to go to Russia. You couldn't get in without a visa. Or you needed a ticket so that you could put a ticket number in and get a fan ID. And one of my friends had a ticket, so he gave me a number. And then I got a little fan ID. And as you can see, I had a quarantine haircut before you, man, knew what coronavirus was. So I took this photo literally in my living room. You can see the state of me there. I just, no trim. And I actually booked a flight for 11:50 p.m. that night. So it was like 7 hours away. And I just packed a small bag. I said, Dad, I'll see you in a couple of days. Got to Stansted. And actually, when I got to Stansted, because the car broke down and it was so, like, we were pushing it so late for that flight, when I ran through, there was no one in the airport. Check-in had closed and everything. And for some reason, my boarding ticket hadn't downloaded. But for some reason, the security guy there, he didn't ask anything else. He just let me through, and I sprinted to the gate. I was like, guys, look, this is my World Cup pass. Please let me get on this plane. And literally they were like, yeah, no problem. They let me get on the plane. But yeah, when I got in, I remember we scored early on. And when we scored, I'm not even joking, this, everyone says this, I'm sure, but England fans have a habit of throwing beer. And when that went in, like, just, there was a split second where all these beers were in the air and everything was slow motion, and like the sound kind of cut out in my head. And then as the beer dropped, like literally, I remember falling forward like 3 rows, like people are on top of each other. No one was sitting in the correct seat. People were in stairways. Security were just losing the concept of, British people are not great at being told what to do anyway. So imagine in a World Cup match when they've had a few beers. And it was just incredible. And even though we lost, obviously we lost ultimately, but I wasn't heartbroken about it. It was just the rush of being in that moment was insane. And at that time, funnily enough, I was thinking about my dad, but I was thinking that my dad would be so gassed that I was here, kind of. He'd call me a football hooligan, but you know, my top was coming off. I couldn't believe it. Beers were flying everywhere. It was a real surreal moment. And then the next day when I'd woken up after crashing in an Airbnb, I got a call from my mum, which was basically the call that we were all dreading, which was that my dad wasn't going to be able to make it. So they said they're going to stop treatment and just make him as comfortable as they could. So being in Moscow by myself, my flight was the next day. So I remember just kind of sitting and going, well, what am I going to do? And then I just burst out crying in the middle of the nowhere. I remember being at the airport. I was crying in the taxi, and the taxi driver didn't say anything because we didn't speak the same language. But I remember when I got out of the car, he stopped me, and then he said, just feel better. He just tried to say what he could. And yeah, eventually I got home, and fast forward, obviously my dad didn't make it. Essentially, it was a very selfish thing that I did for myself. If I was thinking logically, or if I was going with my family's advice, they would tell me that it wasn't a good idea to go. And but when I look back on that moment, I think football is such a... Let me try and compose myself a bit. How do I say this? Football's just a sport. It's like 11 people versus 11 people trying to make something happen. But for that period of my life, it was... If I was to ever write a book, I think this story about how football kind of took me on this mad journey during my dad's battle with cancer would be like the defining chapter.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Untold Stories. If you have missed any episode, make sure you go back and watch, and make sure you subscribe as well for the episodes that are to come.